There is some good science to show us, in fact, how sound stimulates and changes our brainwave state. We do it through a system called binaural beating, where we put different phases of sound, a slightly out of phase sound, in one ear than the other. And the brain, in the brainstem, detects these differences, and it gives rise to a rhythmic pulsing, a sensorial rhythmic pulsing. That's basically what the auditory community has been using to test for different kinds of hearing loss and so forth. Mr. Monroe discovered that that same stimulus can be used to alter consciousness because it can actually alter the brainwave state of an individual. When Bob Monroe discovered that these different sounds created various thresholds of altered states of consciousness, it came to a point where he needed to assign labels to these. We could call one red and one blue, or one Philadelphia and one Kansas, whatever he wanted. He just invented a set of numbers, okay? And so he calls it focus 10, focus 12, focus 15, focus 21, and typifies different kinds of experiences and different kinds of physiological states that people have in these various levels of consciousness. But they're completely arbitrarily just assigned. When you move beyond the earthly experience of consciousness into that realm of human existence, but still within the Earth life system, we call that area focus 27. Okay? But you can call it anything you want, and it matches up with a lot of other cosmologies. It's just the terminology I use is this area called focus 27. And within that area of focus 27, we have something called the Healing and Regeneration Center. Now, although much of the language that I will be using talks about physical things, like this is a physical hotel and conference center. So when I refer to the Healing and Regeneration Center, it sounds like, with my words, that I'm talking about a physical place. Okay? We don't think that's the situation. What we think of it is as a process. It is a process that takes place, and we imbue that process with the concept of physical structure, which isn't too different than what we're doing right now. Is not this, in some cosmologies, an idea in the mind of God, and we are imbuing it with its own physical reality through our state of consciousness. The point being is that, let's take a little trip. Imagine that you have died and you've gone through that process comfortably, and you've gone down the magic tunnel of light that everybody hears about, and there's your Aunt Mary in her apron and a plate full of chocolate chip cookies. Oh, Aunt Mary, I've been waiting to see. Do you think she's been standing there all that time waiting for you? Those cookies should get stale after a while. Well, obviously, we have created that vision, and that might be the big we instead of the we personally, ego I. Created that vision because it's an accepting process, a loving coming together again. Gee, this is really great. Okay. But it's a projection. I mean, scientists tell us that right now these are projections, that I as a human have a certain set of senses about me, and I'm creating what I think is out there, the physical world. If a dog comes in here, they have a different idea. If a moth is in here, if a bat is in here, they perceive this differently based on the senses with which they are equipped. And so you ask the rhetorical, philosophic question, well, which one is the real one, right? Well, obviously the one I see is the real one, But it should arm us intellectually to understand there's probably a Cartesian reality, an ultimate firmament, probably, but it's not like we'll ever be able to prove it, because we know that what's going on, and I think I see you for what you are, is just a projection on my mind's eye. so too after the death process, apparently. So this thing we call the healing regeneration center, this physical center, we see as a process. Okay? And apparently this process is available through exploring in deep meditative states and also the out-of-body experience. Now, I said in my abstract that I sent into the conference organizers that the Monroe Institute doesn't, offer you an out-of-body experience. It doesn't say, come on in, have an out-of-body experience, because we understand that that's part of the subjective concepts of what happens to you. The thing that we do is we set up a very interesting pattern of behaviors, and we demand that you behave in these patterns. And when you get down the row, the only way you're going to be able to do this is to have been out of your body. So you stop thinking about getting out of your body and start thinking task orientation. So let's get in a little deeper then and talk about what we did in our study. Many of the things that I did for several years involving quantitative analysis was to try to demonstrate or prove the efficacy of the hemisync process, measuring physiology, paying attention to what people's brainwave measurements were, what their physiological changes were. Now, the question then becomes, when you're in these states of consciousness, what's more important, that your physiology has changed, that your brainwaves have changed, or what's really going on with you? What's really happening to you? How much can we know, how much can we learn from discovering the neurological underpinnings of changing states of consciousness? Well, it's something that we encourage outside researchers to do. We have a very active exterior research program done at universities and private labs where we support them with providing them with hemisync materials. But in the Monroe Institute, I thought that we should sort of, being the director of research, I got to think this, that we should sort of move beyond that limiting concept, let others on the outside be demonstrating the validity of the physiological changes that take place. But what we were more interested in are the adventures people are having. And is there any meaningfulness, any, might I say, agreed upon picture of reality among these groups of people, or is it simply something that they make up as they go along? And I really didn't have an investment in this. I'm sort of a make-it-up-as-you-go-along guy, and so that would be okay too. I mean, there's a certain amount of agreement as to what this room is made up. Is it possible that there is an agreement to the processes that go on beyond death? I'm not saying rooms and locations and objects, but processes that go on beyond death. Is there an agreement to that, or is it something that we all individually experience? Well, how do you find that out? Well, you have to ask a bunch of questions. You have to send some people out into those realms, and you have to then question them about what their experiences were, and then you have to keep track of a lot of data, scientific stuff. Okay? So with that in mind, that's where we're going to move to now, is looking at these people. First of all, at our series of programs at the Institute, we have sort of an open introductory program called the Gateway Voyage, which everybody goes to. And then we have different branches of programs that go off from there depending upon what your particular interest is. If you're interested in your own personal guidance, getting in touch with your higher self, those kinds of things, whether or not you're interested in exploring your own creative heart energy, taking personal responsibility for your life. You can imagine that's probably our least popular program. And then there are those that are really interested in the death process and the continuum of consciousness after death. And if you want to step into that realm, our first program is called Lifeline. And in the Lifeline program, what we talk about is the idea of rescue. And again, this is an idea concept. We are not saying this is the truth of what's going on here, because sometimes people discover something else, which I'm not going to tell you about. But the format is that there are people that get trapped after death, not realizing that they have died. People who might be continuing to do their jobs because they're so driven to do their jobs, and they don't realize that they've passed. There are other people that move on after death to particular belief system realities. Listen, I saw a picture one time where God was sitting on a big throne on top of a stone white marble staircase, and I've been sitting here waiting for him for a long time, but he hasn't shown up yet. So there are what we think are belief system realities, where if you think that's what's going to happen when you die, that's fine, that can be arranged. And that's where you are. But it's also possible to break down that belief system to experience some larger dimension. That's what the Lifeline program is all about. And of course, it would go to this zone, which Monroe calls Focus 27. Now, for those people who do well in that program and have a deeper interest in the particular areas within Focus 27, there's a Healing Regeneration Center, a planning center, a library, lots of different little areas that are all in this realm. For those who want to explore those realms, then they come back to another program. And we suggest people wait a year or so to come back to the programs. Let yourself absorb this in life. And then a year or so later, come back to another program. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture for you here. These are very senior people. They are very experienced in this form of exploration, in understanding their own experiences and their ability to objectify, to take out of mental space and to put out into objective talking about or writing. So these are people who have had several exposures to the hemisync technology. This study uses a way of looking at what they tell us about their experience, okay? And we analyze this work from the kind of story they write, from the objects that they mention, from their general feelings and visceral concepts of what they have. And then we also take a look at who they are. Where did they come from? Do people that have less education than others talk about things differently? Do older people talk about different things than younger people do? Do men talk about different things than women do? So we tried to look at several variations of this. And in every talk that you do, you have to put up an unreadable slide full of numbers. And so I specifically made an unreadable slide full of numbers here so that you'd know that this was a scientific talk here. I have a crib sheet here where I can read this quite well. And I'm supposed to say, you'll notice in line 2 the values of such and so forth. Okay? And so you believe just about anything I tell you. There's a couple interesting things when you do a study with people. Not everybody answers all the questions, and you wonder why that is and how come it isn't exactly the same set of people that don't answer all the questions. And you're honestly trying to collect this information. In terms of age, the people in the group were anywhere from 30 years old to 90 years old. And the biggest group of people, 39%, were 40 to 49, and the next closest, 28%, were 50 to 59. So our biggest chunk of ages are 40 to 60. And that goes along with what we know about the people that usually attend the Institute. Ask where they came from. We had, people who didn't know where they came from. But most people came from North America, about 10% from Europe, South America and Asia as well. In education, 16% of the people didn't know how educated they were. But interestingly enough, at the Institute, in this particular program, and this usually carries through in most programs, 32% of the people had college educations and 43% of them had graduate work. 6% only had high school educations. So we get a highly educated, middle-aged group of people here, even if they don't know that themselves. Fortunately, only 3% of the people didn't know what sex they were. Now, we had 52% male, 43% female. And in that group, there was a larger, percent, 14% didn't know if they were married or not. But most people were married, 46% married. And there's the same kind of a discrepancy, 12% didn't know if they had children or not. So I don't know how that goes. But we had a pretty even balance between males and females, between marrieds and unmarrieds. We were interested, too, in their medical condition. Were these healthy people or they're sick people? Overwhelmingly, 70% of them did not have serious illnesses. Overwhelmingly, a huge chunk of them. How about psychoactive prescriptions? The idea being, what percent of these people are taking prescriptions, psychoactive prescriptions? And 75% said no. Now, that's going to be interesting because we're going to ask later, are their experiences that they're reporting dependent upon whether or not they're taking psychoactive drugs or not? So that was why we asked that kind of a question. And in different lifestyle choices, we were asking them, were they really good at this Monroe stuff? Could they achieve these states of consciousness on their own without tapes? Which is, of course, our goal. We're not trying to give you these tapes and say, from evermore, you take one a day, for the rest of your life kind of a thing. Mr. Monroe talked about these as being training wheels on a bicycle. Learn how these states of consciousnesses feel. Is that a word? Consciousnesses? Plural word. These various states of consciousness feel.
It is not.
And then you can recreate them yourself. It is not necessary to, always do a tape exercise to get into these states of consciousness. And we would hope, of course, that you eventually integrate these processes into your everyday walking around life. That you redefine what normal is once you have access to these other realms. How about people that have been to other mind training exercises? Yes, they had been. Recreational drugs, 50% said no, they had not done recreational drugs. And the exercise and the smoking thing we were asked, I understand people lie profusely about whether they do a daily exercise or not. Yeah, I walked to the bathroom when I got up. Yeah, that counts. And most of them being non-smokers. So I wanted you to get an idea from that complex slide that we kept track of all this. We kept track of 87 different people coming through over a 2-year cycle. And so this is an accumulation of 2 years of groups, 6 different groups of people, total of 87 people. I guess I wanted to say a little bit about questioning people. They were given questionnaires to fill out after they had their experience. went into an altered state of consciousness experience using the hemisync system in individual rooms. And then when they would come out of their individual rooms, or immediately after their experience, they would fill out these questionnaires and then come out of the rooms and turn them over to the trainers. So we tried to keep people away from each other, comparing their answers, and then they turned them in. So these questions, then, these answers that they were given, as I explained before, we looked at the different meanings of words that people had. In other words, if they said they perceived light or they perceived energy, that was probably weighted about the same thing. We allowed for some sort of interpretive difference between what people said. Symbolic interpretation of, I see crystals, I see crosses, I see this. Common symbols were reported. And then the storyline analysis. Well, I first arrived there and on my left was this, and then after that I did that. And so it was a matter of analyzing the little story they told and, okay, let's get down to the meat of it, what happened when you got there, Now, looking first at describe this process. When you are in the Healing Regeneration Center, describe the process. They're sent in the exercise off to the Healing Regeneration Center, and then they're asked afterwards, describe the process that's ongoing there. And basically what we're saying here is people reported commonly across here energy, almost 20%, light, about 10%, meeting spiritual beings, again, about 15%, and the idea of happiness, enjoyment. They came back from their trip saying, oh, I'm really having a good time, happiness, enjoyment, low. But the biggest indicator was love. The healing and regeneration process in this area of consciousness is love. Now, we talked about whether energy and light might be perceived as the same thing. And if we wanted to, we could put them all in a big bowl and say energy, light, and love are all the same thing. Depends on how you want to look at it. If I were to describe to a friend, if I was walking up and to describe to a friend what they could do to maintain their own personal health, what do I bring back? What informational content do I bring back by my visit to this specialized place? What if I were to walk up to you? What should I tell you to do? And the answers to that pertain to doing physical things. How much exercise you do and food you should eat, so forth and so on. Here's the food one over here. All very low percentages. What's this spike here all about? Express love. Okay? Now, that's pretty interesting because we ask them what they should be telling others they should do. And the answer to that is you need to tell the other, whatever other is, to be expressing love. And that's sort of interesting. There's a zone beyond Focus 27 in Bob Monroe's concept of the Earth life system extends to a realm called Focus 27. And once you break free of the cycle of lifetimes on Earth, you break out of something called the Earth life system. Now, in God's creation, there's more than the Earth life system. There are probably lots more than the Earth life system. But there is a way to visit and to move outside of that. The problem is that we can't relate to each other. We are, in fact, within the Earth life system. So what tools, expletive descriptions can I give you to describe something outside of the Earth life system? Well, it becomes sort of impossible. But we thought we'd ask some people to move into those fringe areas beyond Focus 27 and see what they could discern, pick up in this zone beyond the Earth life system. Interestingly enough, people describe a landscape of some kind. No particular landscape. They just see a landscape of some kind. They see a group dynamic, the idea of there was a group there was a gathering there. But a lot of them just perceive nothing, a void, an emptiness, nothing there. The biggest spike here is creation, and over here some form of guidance. Creative processes. Okay, down here, this idea of energy. And I think that it's little because our meaning of energy, our semantic meaning of energy, carries with it or is imbued with the concept of radiation from here to there, distance, space, and time, everything that we think about in terms of energy. I don't like to use the word energy because of that semantic limitation. Energy is transmitted from one place to the other, propagated over a certain frequency and wavelength and so forth and so on. But outside of electromagnetic reality, all those words and descriptions don't fit anymore, and so I don't think it was perceived very heavily.
Could people pick two things?
Yes, people were able to. People were not forced in choice. This was like a. She's asking, was there a list of things, and they had to pick what they perceived? No, it was a narrative answer, and they would describe. Well, I got out into Focus 33, and while I was there, I perceived nothing. It was an open, empty void. Or they could talk about what they did perceive. And so, yes, when I went through and read these 87 different reports, I would highlight and then enter into the computer thing. So people could have multiple answers.
So I'm kind of surprised that it's only like 15%, 17%. Were the people that had no experience?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How many had no experience?
Yeah, I can turn to that in the document here, and let's do that so that I can answer that question. And I'll turn to looking at your Focus 33 question here. She wants to know how many people had no answer. And that's a really good question. In Focus 33, participants next responded to the open question, Focus 33. Not all participants commented on the exercise. 83% reported these observations. This area called Focus 33 seems to be a creative area. Related, the idea of creation or identified Focus 33 as a place of creation. They either used the word creation or said that this is a place where I can create my own pictures, my own images. They were imbued with this general concept. And let's pay attention to what's bubbling up in questions here. We're talking about an area that we can't talk about. This is an area outside of human experience. The point is, this is very difficult to draw any implications here. And this is why we're sticking our toe out in this water and say, I realize you're limited by your human language. I realize that this is an area outside your expertise. But tell me anyway, kind of a thing, what you pick up, okay? Now, please give me your question.
My experience is that you actually have two different, whatever you want to call it, that you're talking about. When you deal with constructs, and that's one group, these are people that are describing their experience. And then you have another group who have gone beyond constructs, and you're in a different realm entirely. You're in two different realms. Mm-hmm. And it's perceived or it's described as void, nothingness, or emptiness. Mm-hmm. There are different words for it, but you actually have gone beyond ideas of actually an entirely different realm. It's not one realm at all.
I would agree with that, and I don't think, just like we can almost get our heads around, what he's saying is this is probably not describable as a one realm or one universe, as a multiverse concept here, that you can't pin this down in the way that we pin other things down. And I would agree with your description here of this broad scope of interpretation. Just like I can almost get my head around the idea of no space, no time, this is getting your head around the idea of it's not anything that you have ever even conceived or thought of before. It is beyond those concepts. So if I try to nail you down and force you to write something, the idea of writing down it's a void might in fact be a very, very valid situation. It's not that you're perceiving nothing. It's that whatever this is you're perceiving does not compute. I mean, you have to deal with lots of perceptual things in psychology to deal with the question.
That's part of what I'm saying. The other part is whenever you have constructs, then you're in a different zone. Whenever you have percepts, then you're in a different zone.
Sure. Absolutely. Behind,
The people that study near-death experiences have the same problem with concept and language, and I'm curious to know if you use their format, if you've ever taken your data and used their format and calculated it the same way they do, with the same language and the same classifications. Have you done that? Yeah.
Okay, let me repeat the question. What she's asking about is people that study near-death experiences sometimes have the same kind of use of semantic language to describe the experiences that they have. And she's asking whether we have compared our answers that we're getting from this study to the same kind, style, type of research that's done in the near-death studies. Is that your question?
That's my question, yes.
No. But it's a wonderful idea. It's a wonderful idea.
They've spent a number of years trying to solve this problem. My next question is, would you be willing to make your data available for that to be done?
She's asking if we would be willing to make our data available for that, and the answer to that is, of course, yes. In the back over here.
When you speak of the creative experience,
Right.
what they said, were they experiencing creativity that was their own creative space or a creator?
Okay, she's asking what is the nature of the thing called creation that they're describing? What is the process or function? And there's offered several different alternatives for what that might be. And the answer is, I don't know. They wrote down that, and in terms of my data keeping, you know, if I saw the word creation or them describing the creation process, they got a check mark on the list here. Down in front here.
Does this just represent the 33rd attempt at focusing on something, or why?
No, the Focus 33 is another one of those arbitrary labels or zones of consciousness, like I was talking about, 10, 12, 15. You could just put a stamp on this, and the sort of identifier for what this Focus 33 is the first step beyond Earth-life human experience. Outside of the Earth-life human experience, there's more.
Finish my question. Sometimes because it's very difficult to use words.
Yes. Sometimes it's difficult to use words. I'm translating.
You can ask somebody to try to express graphically.
Yes. No.
Was there ever an effort to do any graphic representation?
Yeah, what he's saying is that, and that's very true. Sometimes it's much easier with psychic perceptions, especially in remote viewing, to graphically or to draw your perceptions as opposed to describe them in words. No, we didn't do that. One of the interesting concepts is these are non-physical things. All my experiences with remote viewers had to do with doing physical things on the planet Earth, and to whether or not one could draw and then interpret the drawing in a non-physical way would be an interesting art. But no, we did not do that.
As a follow-up, not so much as an object, but rather as an action.
As an action, right. That'd be an interesting way to do it, a different interpretation. Way in the back, please.
I'm wondering if you tried to correlate their belief system reality with their responses to your
He's asking whether or not we took any people's particular belief systems, what their belief systems were, and then used that to look at what they described as happening in Focus 33 or any of the other realms. No, we did not. We did not ask them to declare their belief systems. These are really kind of mushy, flexible people that have been out there in the ozone a long time. We are going to get into here in the next couple of slides in looking at the different ages and educations and how that might have affected what went on. Over here?
Are you correlating in your quantitative research, are you correlating brainwave patterns with particular subjective reported experiences?
Not in this study. He asked whether or not we're doing any sort of data collection of brainwaves or physiology and correlating them with subjective experiences. Not in this study.
I thought Focus 33 was a brainwave. So what is Focus 33?
Okay. Focus 33 is one of those other arbitrary labels. You could call it Focus Green or Tomato or Kansas.
But how is it different than what is not Focus 33?
Because it has a different physiological state connected with it. She's asking why is Focus 33 unique over Focus 10 or Focus 12? Because it's defined by a physiological brainwave state. Hi.
In talking about what you're looking at, about 20 years ago, I heard Monroe speak, and one thing he talked about that piqued my interest was some of the scary experiences he had.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if, I don't see any of those things recorded here, and I'm wondering if that happened, didn't happen.
She's asking whether or not people had scary or fear-based kinds of experiences, and the 87 people we looked at during this study, and the answer is no, they did not. But remember, they were very senior people in the process. And so if they were having those kinds of experiences, they probably dropped out early on. Because these are people who had been coming back to the Institute for several years.
How did Monroe deal with that?
She's asking how did Mr. Monroe himself deal with scary experiences. He outgrew it. If you read through the 3 books that he wrote over the years, you can see he changes his ideas and concepts of how things happened as the years went by. Asked to describe the human experience itself, look back on Earth and describe what is this human experience all about. Interestingly enough, people reported seeing a mirror. They said, well, I'm looking at myself in a mirror. Okay, interesting kind of a concept. So they're describing themselves. Have a little love going on in here. Describe what is the human experience all about. In looking at a covariant analysis, what we're interested in here is whether or not people who report weird and strange things happening to them after death are driven by, well, these are old folks and they're going to die pretty soon anyway, so they think about those things naturally. So, does this match our population base here? These are, the blue is energy and light and spirit beings. You don't have to take a quick look at this. You don't have to know what all these things mean. What you can see readily from looking at the chart is the big chunk of reporting came from the middle age group, which is where the big chunk of people in the program were. So it's okay. What we're saying is that the spooky answers of the spiritual world aren't driven because you're an old person and you're going to die really soon anyway, and you think about that a lot. The same kind of reporting came back from the middle age group. Looking at a covariant analysis of education, is it just these lower educated people that report perceiving these things? There's a theory, you know, that if you have enough education, you'll get all this nonsense out of your brain, and you'll start to think about things correctly as the word really is. It's just those uneducated people that think about these crazy things. Well, as it turns out, the people with the college and the graduate work reported the most experiences. So it goes along with the group that we had in the experiencing this. How about a covariant analysis of people who were looking at illness, who had a serious illness? Does having a serious illness cause you to space out in your head and have these weird spiritual things that aren't real? No. Obviously, the people that had the most experiences and reported the most were the healthy people. How about drug use? Notice the big spike on no. Okay? Big spike on no. Taking drugs would seem to inhibit your ability to have these kinds of experiences rather than enhance them on the particular kinds of medication these people were taking. How about being in psychotherapy? Obviously, the greatest population said, no, we aren't in psychotherapy, have never been in psychotherapy, and those were the people that gave us the biggest answers. Does that mean they should have been? I mean, I guess that's open to interpretation. So, the time thing is stringing out here. Again, I invite you to look at the report on the web if you want to. You might have noticed this is my book, okay? This is the commercial announcement here.
What's the title?
It's called Captain of My Ship, Master of My Soul. And has a CD that fits in your computer in the back, so you get more than just the book, you get the CD that goes in there. How frequently are we run courses almost all the time. Actually, it's 9 weeks on, 1 week off, but not the same course every particular time. It's about the same thing as taking a cruise to the Bahamas, except this is a different kind of a cruise. You know. 6 days. 6 days. You arrive on a Saturday, leave on that following Friday. Oh, Larry says, what's on this crazy CD in the back of the book here? Remember I talked about those classified Soviet documents that drove the United States into looking deeper into this thing called remote viewing? Well, since those were in the early 70s, they're all available in the Freedom of Information Act, and I downloaded them and included them here on the disk. So those are on there. Plus, there are 4 different workshops in remote viewing and learning how to do remote viewing. Lots of personal items and things about me. This book is about my spiritual journey through life. So there's some interesting things included here on the CD. She's asking about the idea of doing some research on the healing regeneration zone and people that might be well and then visit that area and then come back feeling better. Not in the way that you mean. First of all, the definition of the Healing Regeneration Center is something that happens after you die, supposedly. But maybe in this universe of oneness and no space and no time, we can actually incorporate the lessons that we learn from that in our everyday life. Treat each other with love. So, yes, there have been people that have realized in their own selves exploring those realms, but it's not something that we kept track of in terms of this study.